Let's bring our good friend John McMullen into the conversation. He has his observations up right now at 973ESPN.com. That on top of a lot of other things to dive into. And you can read all of John's Eagles coverage on our website, 973ESPN.com, plus his National Extra Points column now appearing on the website. Follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. And it was an ass-kicking, John. Old-fashioned.
Yeah, it was.
Here's my steel tip boot up, jammed down your throat. How's that?
And it went the way. I don't like to toot my own horn, but I'm going to because I thought maybe the Eagles would start slow coming off the bye, and I just looked at that Dallas team, and I just couldn't picture a way that they could win that football game, and it kind of went forward in that direction. The Eagles obviously struggled in the first half, but by the time the second half rolled around, they didn't even have a kicker. It didn't matter. In fact, that made it worse because it forced the Eagles to go for it for 2-point conversions on fourth down with the Alshon Jeffrey touchdown, and they should have been 4 for 4 on the 2-point conversions if Zach Ertz doesn't fumble the one. It was an old-fashioned butt kicking. And
John, you talked about I had Philly winning that game going away. I even nailed a Torrey Smith touchdown.
Yeah, well, that's impressive. And I said on the countdown to kickoff stuff, I said, Mike made some good points, but we got to forget about Torrey Smith. And overall, by the way, he had another egregious drive.
Yeah, he did.
If you're going to look at the one aspect of that game, and obviously you're nitpicking about a 9-1 football team, but that sort of looked like, outside of Alshon Jeffrey, that kind of looked like the 2016 Eagles receiving corps last night. They were bad. Nelson was bad. Zach Ertz was bad, which is rare. First time this year he had a bad football game. And Torrey continues to be bad. And at some point, you don't have to, obviously, but there's not a lot to criticize the Eagles for this season. But that's one thing you can criticize them for. And they got to get Mac Hollins more playing time.
Hey, John, Wentz came out. He struggled a little bit, too. Some of his throws were off the mark. They didn't look like they were in sync. But even with Wentz and the offense struggling, the offense amassed, 215 yards on the ground or something like that last night? It seems that they don't have to. Dallas last night tried to put the game in Prescott's hand. He could not perform. And the Eagles last night said, we'll just keep running the ball on you. You can't stop us.
Yeah, for the second straight game, it's been so long. You go back to that Denver game, and there were a number of times where they used the Broncos' aggressiveness against them, particularly Von Miller, Aqib Talib on the outside. They did the same thing with David Irving again and again and again. They just let him run himself out of the play, and then they trapped behind him, and they had these huge gaping holes in the second half to the point you're saying, come on. If I'm the Cowboys coach, if I'm Rod Marinelli, I'm taking him off to the side and say, you don't realize what they're doing to you? You have to play more disciplined football. But you got to give the Eagles coaching staff a lot of credit. They saw this, obviously, in the game film and the preparation, and they game planned for it, and it worked to perfection. And they used it again and again and again because the player never realized what was going on.
Yeah, and for the most part, their run defense and their front seven's been pretty good this year.
Yeah, things change when Sean Lee is out of the game. We all know that. They've never been, and he's an injury-prone player. So you got a pretty large sample size to look at. When he doesn't play, the Cowboys struggle. When he plays, they generally win. And he's that good of a football player. But you can't make excuses if you're the Cowboys. You don't have to look far. You just got to look at the team on the other side. And we talked about those trap plays. On the big Jay Ajayi run, that was Halapoulivaati Vaitai. making the big block on the trap. So, they've replaced Jason Peters, Jordan Hicks, Darren Sproles, and they persevered. As I said, they didn't even have a kicker last night. Forget about changing from Dan Bailey to Mike Nugent, who actually kicked well. The Eagles didn't have a kicker. So it's hard to make the injuries excuse if you're the Dallas Cowboys.
John, how about the Eagles' run game and the running backs by committee, if you will? I think I tweeted out at one point that who would have taken the odds that Kenyon Barner would have the first rushing touchdown, but really the way they spread the ball amongst, I guess, 4 running backs, and they're able to keep everybody happy. I know Doug talked about that today.
Yeah, well, I think if you win, everybody's happy, and we'll see. I expect the Eagles to keep winning, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. It has been strange to me at times, but it's been successful. And you talk about Kenyon Barner. The guy had 2 reps last night. One was the great catch that set up the touchdown, and the other was the touchdown. That's pretty productive. And the fact that this team keeps getting production from players like him and Corey Clement, who had another touchdown. LeGarrette Blount was excellent. Now we've had Jay Ajayi for 2 games, and he's broken huge runs in both of them. The running back by committee, it doesn't necessarily make all that much sense on paper, but in practicality, it's been tremendous.
What did you think of the performance from Alshon Jeffrey last night? Because I know Mike and I talked last week about, is he a true WR1? And last night he caught 4 of the 7 targets that were thrown to him and had a pretty decent night.
Yeah, he was the only receiver that kind of showed up for the Eagles yesterday. As I said, the rest of the guys were really subpar for most of the game, and he might have had his best game as an Eagle. And obviously that was interesting coming off the fact that the ankle issue came out. He was held out of practice, so people were concerned. He was questionable for the game. And the Eagles did use him more in the slot than they have all year, so maybe that was sort of to help him a little bit with that ankle, because there's a lot more running on the outside. But he was definitely effective. I'm not sure if he's a true wide receiver 1. Talked about this on the show last week. He doesn't belong in the conversation with Julio Jones or Antonio Brown or guys like that, or even the Adam Thielens of the world. But for this team, he's from day one when he got here, he's by far their best receiver.
Since you brought it up, they were without Jake Elliott for most of the game. What's the plan moving forward? Do we know anything about that plan moving forward? And then do we also think we're going to see a lot more 2-point conversions? Doug's eyes lit up at that question today. Like, hey, do you like going for 2? Yeah.
Yeah, and there's like a double-edged sword to that, and Doug kind of intimated at least a little bit about it. They were very successful. As I said, they should have been 4 for 4 if Ertz doesn't fumble. So that's great, but you also have to think ahead, and coaches kind of have that mentality. They want to have 1 or 2-point conversions in their hip pocket in case a game comes down to a 2-point conversion. And the last thing you want to do is put it on film, right, where other people can see it. And if you keep running 2-point conversions, at some point you're going to have to double up, and people are going to see it on film. So I think that could hurt them in some way if a playoff game, as I said, a big-time situation comes down to a 2-point conversion. So obviously you'd prefer to have your kicker and kick extra points. And we'll see with Jake Elliott. Obviously he's in the protocol. And as Doug mentioned today, they don't have to make a decision really until practice on Wednesday. Technically, they don't even have to make a decision then. But I think we'll get more clarification by Wednesday. Clearly, his hope is that Jake will be able to pass and be back on the field against Chicago next week.
Couple things, John, that we want to dive into. And I thought today Doug was asked about I thought he played his hand a little bit on moving forward. We keep thinking that we're going to see more Ajayi, but he said when Jay got here, he got 20 carries a game in Miami. But the conversation you have with him is now, listen, you're in a system where we have a rotation. So that kind of, to me, indicates that they don't look at him as the guy or the guy that they want to have the most carries. It's just when it's your turn, perform.
No, and I never thought that, but I did think it was going to be sort of a two-headed monster.
Right.
When they did get him,
like he would get the 15
Yeah.
to 17, and then Blunt kind of gets his 8 to 10, and maybe Clement. But it was pretty clear today that they sat him down and said, "You're a part of a rotation, and that all these guys are going to get carries, except for Wendell Smallwood."
I mean, you really, except for Wendell, he's the odd man out. But I mean, you have to give Corey Clement a lot of credit. For, if you talk about improvement within the year, we always talk improvement from year one to year two, especially about Carson Wentz, who's taken the huge leap. But, if you look at improvement in year, from when he got here as an undrafted free agent to what he is now, and basically it's a guy who's scoring touchdowns left and right, I don't know if there's a more improved player on this team from OTAs and until now, after 10 games, than Corey Clement. I mean, he's lost weight. They asked him to do that. He's gained speed. He couldn't catch the football at all when he got here, and that's kind of understandable because Wisconsin doesn't do that. They don't throw the ball to their running backs, and he's all of a sudden he made that one great catch for a touchdown, and he's also turned into the best pass protector they have in the backfield. You never hear that about rookie running backs. So he belongs on the field, and he belongs in that committee setup.
We're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. How about, you mentioned Vaitai. He was, on that big run by Ajayi, but on what he has done to improve and how he's kind of gotten to this point. I mean, Doug talked about it today, to the point where they're not even really giving him a lot of help anymore.
No, they're not, and you don't hear his name, and that's good for an offensive lineman because generally when you hear their names, it's holding calls or they're getting beaten for sacks. And he's just been rock solid. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he played left tackle in college and he's more comfortable. So we all assume it's easier to play left tackle than right tackle, which is not necessarily true anymore, because if you've seen the pass rushers sort of lined up to face Lane Johnson each and every week, the NFL's changed a bit from that perspective. And then the second part of it is that comfort factor, and he's just feels more comfortable on the left side than the right side. So as weird as it sounds, he's just better as a left tackle than a right tackle. And he's always been very athletic. So when you see those traps, and not a lot of teams can sort of kick their tackles inside to get those big trap blocks, the Eagles were able to do it because of the athleticism of Jason Peters. And they haven't missed much with Vaitai because he's very athletic himself.
John, I saw you mention, too, that Will Beatty was one of the two guys that were inactive. I guess that's a good thing, right, bringing these guys in. You want to know that they're around, but inactive. If you're activating them, that's probably where there's a problem, that Ellerbe inactive. And then Wendell Smallwood, he's in purgatory right now?
Yeah, I mean,
he was inactive.
Kind of admitted it.
Purgatory.
Back in Denver, if you remember, Zach Ertz was a late scratch. He admitted way back then the only reason Wendell dressed was because Zach wasn't able to. So you knew you had the three tight ends up. One of the running backs was going to be down, and he's not part of the rotation. The top three guys are who they are. We know it's Blunt, it's Ajayi, and it's Clement. And then you have Kenyon Barner, who's the kickoff returner and the punt returner. So there's really not a spot for him, barring injury at this point. He might get a chance again down the road, but it's not going to be soon. As far as Beatty, he didn't dress because he just got here. the Eagles want him to be the game day swing tackle. They are not comfortable with Isaac Seumalo being the backup swing tackle on game days. And when he learns the offense and gets up to speed, remember, he's missed the entire year. He's had a lot of injury problems. Ultimately, I think down the stretch of the season, he's going to be dressed, but obviously you hope he doesn't have to play. And the same with Ellerbe. I think Ellerbe, at some point, he's going to dress and possibly push Joe Walker for playing time in the base defense.
Yeah, I know Doug talked about Joe Walker today. What were your impressions of Ronald Darby and how he played coming back after missing those 8 games with that dislocated ankle? And how do you think his return affected the rotation, if you will, in the secondary?
Well, I thought that was the most interesting because he played every snap. I was a little surprised at that. And the second surprise was where he played. He didn't go back to left corner. He went to right corner. And, the 18 plays before he was injured, he was the left corner. Generally, your best cornerback lines up on the left side because most quarterbacks in this league are right-handed, so they're going to throw the football over there more often, and you want your best guy over there. He was that, obviously, week one. He's certainly the most talented cornerback on the Eagles roster, but Jalen Mills has played so well that they didn't want to move him, and they think he deserved to stay over there. And Darby fit right back in. He played very well. I think part of it, I've been talking all week, the name is big, Dez Bryant, but he's not the same guy, and he doesn't get separation. So don't get too excited because I think if Rasul was out there, Dez Bryant wouldn't be getting separation either.
Yeah, no, he looks like a shot fighter, really. He does. And it looked like the Eagles' game plan, John, when you look at the tackles, Darby had 8 tackles, and it was almost, and Mills had 7. So it was like, hey, we'll let you throw the ball underneath because we try. And Patrick Robinson, by the way, had 5 tackles. Jenkins had 4. You look at the guys in the secondary. The Eagles are saying we'll let you catch the ball because we trust we're going to tackle.
Yeah, and the Cowboys, they went after Darby early, and they should have, because you have to test a guy who hasn't been out there for so long, and you're hoping that he is a little bit rusty, and maybe the form isn't there to tackle well. And the one thing Dez is, he's still a really big and a really physical receiver. He might not have the speed, as I said, or the quickness to create much separation in his routes any longer, but he's still a big guy.
Yeah.
And Darby did really well with those quick hitches and things of that nature and smoke screens, and they tried to take advantage of him, but he worked hard, and he got Desmond down more often than not.
Yeah, and I really thought that the Eagles basically allowed Dallas, I don't want to say they wanted them to, but they allowed them to run the ball with some regularity because really they didn't believe that Alfred Morris was a game breaker, so he got his yards, but that was their way of saying, we'll let you run, but Prescott, you're going to have to make a play on this event. We'll let you get to the red zone, but once you get there, pal, you're not going to be able to run the ball when it's inside the 20, and you're going to have to make a play, and Prescott just could not make the play.
Yeah, I mean, I think more on that game falls on Dak because I do think they ran the football better. And I'm sure Jim Schwartz, and we'll talk to him tomorrow, I'm sure he wasn't happy with the Eagles' run defense, specifically the linebackers. Lost a couple gaps. That's the perfect game for a coach because you win going away 37-9, but you still have stuff to complain about. That's what coaches love. And I don't think he's going to be happy about the way the Eagles gave up some runs because obviously they came in as the number 1 run defense in the NFL. So I'm sure he'll be harping on that.
Right.
But Dak wasn't able to take advantage of it. I mean, he was terrible.
He was terrible. And I got to tell you, it was disappointingly terrible to the point I started to feel bad for him because, look, a lot of people have been, it's Wentz, it's Dak, and you kind of wrote about it this week. It's not these two guys. And I've been a fan of Dak Prescott. I think the kid has done a tremendous job. But, man, without Elliott, he really looked like a lost soul out there the other night, like a one-man army who couldn't figure out what to do.
No. And Ed Werder, leading up to the game, had asked 8 general managers, who would you pick, Carson or Dak Prescott? And 7 picked Carson Wentz, and I joked to him, the other guy shouldn't have a job. Sean McDermott's not a general manager, but he's the only guy who I think could look at maybe
I gotta be
Carson Wentz and Dak Prescott.
I gotta be honest, John. I was disappointed because I've been kind of a Dak guy, not more than Wentz, but just he is just. Last night was the indicator that he's just a guy. He's a guy who has a great running back. And it tells you a lot about the running back. Missing Lee hurt them on defense. Missing Smith hurt them. I mean, not as much as it did the week before. But the Eagles weren't buying anything they were selling without Elliott in there.
No, hey, look, and that's the thing. People, get upset and they say you're for the Eagles. I'm not an Eagles fan by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, Carson Wentz is just a much better prospect, and he was last year. And I said it last year. And I'm a Dak fan. I think Dak is more than just a guy. I really do. I think he struggled.
Not last 2 weeks.
A really bad 2 weeks. But everybody struggles in this league. I think he can come out of it. I think he's an above-average quarterback. But when you're talking about ceiling of players and you're talking about prospects, I mean, he's just not in Carson Wentz's league.
No.
But I said the same thing when he was 13-3 and Carson was 7-9. If you look at the players and you looked at the film, just one guy had a much larger ceiling, and that was always and is always Carson Wentz.
We kind of described it at the top of the show, John, that Dak got a dose of what Carson went through last year, not having the weapons, having to do a lot by himself, and now Wentz is getting a dose of what he had, what Dak had last year, a running game and weapons.
Yeah, and by the way, and this I think speaks, and I go back to the one thing you can look at this game and be disappointed as an Eagles fan. I still think, I still know there is plenty of room for improvement as far as the weapons go around Carson Wentz. He does not have great receivers. He has a very good pass-catching tight end, and he's got solid running backs. But even then, they're certainly not Ezekiel Elliott or players of that nature in the backfield. I mean, there's still plenty of room for improvement, but this kid's 9-1, and he makes them all look like stars. And it's him. It's not the other way around.
Yeah, it's the separation is beginning with these second-year players. You're starting to see them, kind of make moves, and he has made big moves. And right now he has the Eagles at 9-1. How many games will the Eagles win during the regular season? Vote at 973 ESPN on Twitter. John McMullen at 973ESPN.com. Read all of his Eagles-Cowboys coverage, and his NFL column Extra Points is now posted at 973ESPN.com. You can check that out. And, of course, John daily here on the Sports Bash. All right, pal, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
All right, thanks, guys.
And he's brought to you by Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at GinoPinto.com. Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years.